All right. So, all right. I have to go back to my original webcam because the other ones that I bought just fucked up. I don't know. It won't, you know, it just keeps crapping out. So anyway, this video, I'm going to talk about Megadeth's final album, I guess, which is, you know, entitled Megadeth. So that is a song from the beginning of the first riff that I played. That's from the song Tipping Point. Now, what we're going to discuss here is Dave ripping Dave off? Because that's basically just the same riff as Liar from So Far So Good So What. The first 2 seconds I heard that, I go, oh shit, that's Liar, right? So fans of old school Megadeth, like me, probably, you know, that's probably what they heard first, right? So anyway, that's the title of this video is Dave ripping off Dave? Or is he smart enough to understand the current trends? And is this actually, you know, basically, you know, a play on what's happening today? You know, which is you're encouraged to basically, you know, sound like something else, right? So you heard the first riff. It basically sounds exactly the same thing as Liar, because I just went right into Liar and it fit perfectly, right? So anybody who is a Megadeth fan, I think, would have caught that. Anyway, little piece of news trivia here, which is kind of weird and funny. I guess it's not really news, but the other day I'm driving around here. Remember, this was Megadeth headquarters for a long time, right? North County, San Diego. So the other day I'm driving around. I drive like a Challenger, a white Challenger with like, you know, red racing stripes on the side. I don't know. I realized later that I bought this total redneck car. And now, you know, I'm kind of debating whether to get rid of it or not, you know. Because I bought it when I was, you know, in like a different headspace. You know, when I just wanted to, I don't know what I was thinking. Now that I, you know, look back and I go, what was I thinking buying a total redneck car? Which is basically like, you know, like I said, Dodge Challenger, white Dodge Challenger RT Classic with red racing stripes on the side. Every single person wants to, you know, street race me all the time. So, anyway, I'm driving in that car around town, and there's a car right in front of me, and its license plate is Megadeth without the H, because you're only allowed to have 7 characters. How crazy is that? How weird is that? That I would run into that car, and that car's right in front of me, and then he went into a gas station, you know, and I was going straight. I was like, what the fuck? So I just thought that was weird. Probably one of the people that's associated with, you know, the Megadeth camp, I think. Because like I said, this was the headquarters for Megadeth for a long time. They had, I think he had a studio in here, and everything else, right? So Megadeth without the H. And what are the chances of all the people living in this town that, you know, I run into it, not only run into it, the dude is right in front of me. And then I look at the license plate and it says Megadeth. It's like, wow, all right. You got to be a pretty hardcore fan to do that, right? So we got some hardcore fans around here, I think. If you've been following this series, I usually give like one little story here and there. I think I got one more story from Megadeth, which is kind of interesting like this. Anyway, so that's the thing. Is he just ripping himself off? Or is he smart enough to the current culture where he's intentionally putting it there? All right? So let's tackle the first part, which is he ripping himself off? You know, I kind of talked about this. This is going to be in the Riff series, right? That, you know, he's just sort of repeating the same patterns over and over again, you know, right? If this is not loud enough, you're going to have to turn it up on your end. So unfortunately, this is all I can do here. So is this the same patterns repeated over and over again? which is my claim. Not just with Megadeth, but with all kinds of music. It's like similar patterns over and over again. Even, like I said, the Tony Iommi video, right? It's like those typical blues licks that are, repeated, right, for that genre of music. For here, there's like a lot more, notes, right? So this pedal, instead of, remember I talked about the E pedal? And here, instead of that, he just moved it to the A string. That same feel is that new riff from Tipping Point. So anyway, I thought that was weird. So, and then it kind of, of course, the rest of the song is different. It goes off onto its own thing. But is he out of ideas? I guess there's many things we can talk about. Is he out of ideas? That's one. Or is he intentionally doing it? So, is he out of ideas? I don't think so. Because when you play like this with a lot of notes, it's not like Black Sabbath where you have to come up with these iconic singular riffs. Right? That's not what's going on here. Everything is just... Right? Everything is just that. So, I don't think that he's out of riffs at all. Right? So, he probably reused the same patterns. And then probably thought about it and said, well, that kind of sound, or maybe it didn't even occur to him. I don't know. So, because when you're a songwriter like that, I think, and you have so many albums under your belt, right? You got to try something new. So clearly what I get from this is that he's sort of putting things together in a different way, right? Which may be good or bad. I don't know. I heard the 3 songs. I thought they were good. I think they're pretty strong songs. But this one with the Tipping Point, that's the first thing that I thought, oh wait, that's a straight rip-off of Liar. But I guess you're, allowed to rip yourself off, right? He's just sort of borrowing that same kind of pattern and feel from 1988. And he's able to, do that. So that song is actually, about Chris Poland, Liar. And then Chris Poland actually wrote a book, an autobiography, I think, called Liar. So I want to read that one day. But I thought that was kind of, cool. How cool is it that Dave Mustaine writes a song about you? Right? Right? He's written a song about you, so, I don't know. It's kind of like Dio. Right? I run the Metalhead's Journey channel, and there's the fan, and then he sings them off. So, how cool is that Dio sings you off, right? And then, the dude was like, crowd surfing when he shouldn't be. And then he got taken out. So he got kicked out of the show or whatever happened to him. But Dio, sang him off. It's kind of like that, right? So it's like, that's the way I feel anyway. But, it's like how Chris Poland must have really fucked up to have Dave write a song about him like that. But anyway, it's cool, right? It's like how many people pissed him off so much that he wrote a song about you. So anyway, I do want to read his autobiography though. I think that's kind of cool. It came out a long time ago. Anyway, so that's the thing. So why does it sound like that? Because he's just reusing the same patterns, right? He's reusing the same patterns. And it's almost like all the riffs are similar. I told you about this, but take this with a grain of salt. They're kind of similar, but it's the way you put it together, right? So, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it because the rest of the song isn't like that. It kind of goes in a different direction. It's almost like everything I say, right, about Megadeth is going to be, good, with good intentions, obviously. So, it almost doesn't fit with the rest of the song. So, I don't know what the purpose of that riff is right in front because it doesn't repeat itself. Remember the way he used to write, and that's why I think that he's trying to maybe do something new, right? So the way that he used to write is very functional to where you introduce a theme like that, right? In musical composition and classical music, oftentimes it's like, there's like an introduction, there's like a main theme and sort of thing. If you think about that as a theme for a second, not as an intro, right? At some point later, you have to repeat that. And he doesn't repeat it. I don't think he repeats it. Or does it happen at the end? Maybe, I'm not sure. But it's kind of like Tornado of Souls. That entry riff, right? The beginning riff, he repeats it at the end. That's a songwriting tool to remind you that, oh, wait, we're back to that again. So I'm not really sure what the purpose of that riff is up front. when the song kind of goes, this way, right? So I don't know. Maybe he's consciously trying to do something different. Is my thinking, is that he's consciously trying to do it to where, take it different places. I guess, I don't know. So like I said, that's the first thing. I guess he's allowed to rip himself off, but it sounds very familiar. Or is he trying to do that on purpose? Because the notion today is that we want familiarity. I talked to you about this before. When you write pop songs, right, they want familiarity. They want you to sound like something that came out that's a hit, because the fan is going to go, talking about strictly pop music for a second, right? The fan is going to go, oh, wait, this song reminds me of that song. I really like that song. And in your mind, because, most people are kind of, like I said, it's a consumer culture where they're not really thinking, right? So, the bottom of the pyramid people, right? You have the top of the pyramid. These people control the bottom of everybody down here. You're either here or you're here, or you're like me, who's cool, who knows about everything, who's conscious about all this stuff, right? So for those type of people, their thinking is, this song reminds me of that song, whatever that other song is. I like that song, therefore I like this song. You follow the logic? This is what's going on in the average person's head, is that. So familiarity is good. So that's the thinking today, is that if you go sit, into a songwriting session with like pop musicians, right? That's why everything sounds the same, right? They'll tell you to rip it off. Ripping it off is good because, well, like I just told you, that song is a hit. Oh, this reminds me of that. I like this. So that is the kind of the psychology. That's kind of like hacking your mind almost, right? So songwriters understand that to some level. They'll do whatever they can to, so maybe he's aware of that, and he's, in his sort of way, he's throwing, you know what I mean? Like sort of vintage vibes at you, right? He's throwing sort of, legacy vibes at you, and then saying, oh, look. So someone like me will come along and go, oh, wait, this is like a throwback, right? This reminds me of classic Megadeth. Cool, right? So maybe that's the effect he was going for. Maybe he intentionally put it there so that fans would be like, oh yeah, this is cool. This is, classic Megadeth. It sounds like classic Megadeth, right? So maybe that is the intention. I don't know. Right? I don't think he's out of ideas, because, this kind of playing, right? I mean, I could come up with 50 riffs right now. So he pretty much sort of invented this. So I'm sure he could, come up with a bunch of stuff. But like I said, it's how you put it together that matters. So this is either accidental, right? Accidental, or it's sort of, intentional, to the point where I know what the audience will expect. I'll give them a bit of a throwback culture. But I think if that was the case, like I said, I just think that, and I'm not saying anything bad. I mean, who am I to say anything bad, right? But I just think that it's kind of weird how that riff starts out and then the song just goes somewhere else. I don't know, right? How would the song be different if that first 30 seconds of it were the lyre riff, if that wasn't there? Sometimes what happens is if you put too much, it confuses the audience, right? Like someone like me, I can't get over that. I listen to it and go, oh wait, lyre, 30 seconds, I'm stuck on that. So why is that there, right? And the rest of the song kind of registers, but doesn't register too much to me, because I keep thinking about the first stuff, the first riff. So it's kind of a mixed bag to where, I'm a musician, so it's different for me, right? To the casual listener that doesn't understand any of this, I think it probably came off well, right? It probably threw, like I said, heritage, legacy, however you want to think about it, classic Megadeth vibes. And they're like, oh shit, Dave's writing songs like that again, right? So maybe that was the intention. I don't know. So I got a mini haircut because I didn't know what else to do. The hair was, I just got back from vacation, so I cut my hair before that. So all around here, I told her just take a smidgen off. And then I said here, because it was getting too long, it was getting that kind of that mushroom kind of thing. I said right here, take an inch off, take a smidgen off the side so that, this is still like that, right? This will still kind of grow longer. So I don't know. So, and then I just got back from Lake Arrowhead. So pretty cool. I was there. I just got back yesterday. It's so dry. My skin is all dry. So if you see some differences because my skin is so dry. Because the air is dry over there. So I go over there, we go on a boat tour, and then he's talking about, like, everybody that lives around the lake. Sammy Hagar lives there. Or, he has a house there. All these houses are like $4 million. And they're talking about how his sister is in that house. And she will, she's just like crashed out there. So, and they talk about literally every person, every like big Hollywood person has a house on, Lake Arrowhead. Like Lucille Ball used to have a house there. The guy from Trader Joe's, the owner of Trader Joe's, has a house there. So everybody has a house there. I just got back from there yesterday. Anyway, that's why before that I wanted to get a haircut. So that's pretty much it. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say. I just thought that was kind of weird that first riff sounds exactly like, like a classic Megadeth riff. I do want to hear the album. So that's going to come out later this month. I don't like the cover, though. I think he should have... I think two things here. I don't think he should have called it Megadeth. Just my opinion, Just my opinion. So you don't have to agree with it. But I don't think he should have called it Megadeth. Self-titled it, right? Because that usually works well for the first album, or like, kind of like what Metallica did. Kind of like their, fourth or fifth album, right? But to self-title your final album, I don't know. It seems kind of different, right? And then the cover, I'm not sure what's up with that. I mean, I think he should have went back to that kind of artwork cover, like, like Rest in Peace, that kind of stuff. World Needs a Hero. That would have been better, I think. So, I don't know. Artistic choices are artistic choices. It's whatever the artist feels. Maybe it is going to work out. This is kind of like, it kind of looks like the, the Countdown to Extinction, that kind of, color scheme, you know what I mean? Kind of different. Right? So I don't know. Maybe it's going to work out. But supposedly he re-recorded Ride the Lightning. I talked about that. Remember I talked about Ride the Lightning before, he even announced, the album and stuff like that. I talked about how, Ride the Lightning, and then I talked about how this sounds like a riff that, Dave might have came up with and stuff like that. And that was before he announced all that album and stuff, But I think this is kind of abrupt, because I think this was somewhat inspired, my opinion, somewhat inspired by the turning of events of Ozzy's death. And then after that, it's like, it's like all of a sudden you're gone, at 76, right? So, and then how the whole world kind of, basically, the metal community basically, didn't know what to do. And, that kind of stuff. I feel maybe it was inspired by that. Like, maybe, he kind of saw that, and then he was like, oh man, I better, his words, bow out when he's on the top, right? So what I think he should have done, again, just my thing, what I think he should have done is just, he should have probably announced that, oh wait, this is going to be the last Megadeth album, and then taken about a year to write it, right? So what we got was just like, all of a sudden it's just, this is the last album, and then it's just, all of a sudden, right? So that way he could have taken all this time. This is what, I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm just saying that, then he could have taken like that whole year to just get this worked out. Because, a lot of it is just song arrangement, putting it together in a way that it makes sense. It's got to make logical sense. Like Rest in Peace, every single song on there makes sense, right? Everything makes sense. The riffs alone kind of don't matter. Anyone can write, I can write 50 riffs right here, but the challenge is to put it together in a way that it makes sense, and the vocal melody. The vocal melody is the most important thing. The vocal melody has to make sense, right? So, that's why that album is so good, is because everything makes sense. The vocal melody makes sense, and then the song makes sense, the lyrics make sense, everything makes sense, right? So, Rest in Peace. So, I think maybe, because if this is the last album, right, you want it to be like a, the biggest, masterpiece that you could possibly do. So maybe that would have been better. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know. Don't crucify me. But I'm just saying, that would have been better if he kind of took that whole year and then be like, okay, this is my last album. That's it. That way the anticipation is getting built up and everybody's like, oh, what? This is the last album, Since he's told us, there hasn't been time to react. Already there's, so what I would have done from a marketing point of view is that, like I said, I would have said, oh, wait, this is, we're recording the last album now. Or, we're writing the last album now. And then just kind of drawn that out for like a year. Because a legacy artist like that can do that, right? Normal, other people couldn't do that. People wouldn't give a shit, right? But a legacy artist like that can do that. And just kind of build the anticipation that way. And then, maybe share a little bit with the audience like it's, good to do now, right? And then sort of put it together in a way that it totally makes sense, right? Put it together in a way that it totally makes sense. Because Part A has to follow Part B, and then that has to work synergetically with everything, right? So that kind of songwriting quality, is hard to come by. I can write 50 riffs, but like I said, putting it together in a song is going to be a challenge. Unless he's going for that, oh wait, I want to be different than everything we've done before. Maybe he's going for that. I don't know, That's the thing here, right? You want it to be different, but you don't want it to be so different that it's way the fuck out there where no one can relate to it, right? I'm not saying none of the stuff that the songs that he's released is like that. I'm just generally saying that, you don't want it to be like, I got a frog in my throat here. So, I don't know. Hopefully the rest of the album is good. Just like this, I think. I heard like I said, I heard all 3 songs. Looks pretty good. It just seems that somebody else had commented, oh wait, the mix is bad. The mix is definitely better than the last one. The Sick, the Dying, right? That one was kind of, strange. So this one's a little bit better than that one, for sure, I think. I think a part of this is, I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion. I'm sorry, right? I'm just trying to tell you what I feel, right? Not that you should care what I feel or maybe even agree with what I feel, but I feel, and I know you're going to hate me for it, sorry, but I feel that the best drummer that Megadeth ever had is Gar Samuelson, because he understood the music. That was the best, Megadeth lineup, the Peace Cells lineup, because he understood the music, and he's kind of like Bill Ward, to where he's like a drummer who reacts to the music, right? He reacts to the music. He's not just like a straight up beat kind of guy. Nick Manza was like that, but he was more like a machine, to where he's just straight up kind of, he'll just give you the beat that you wanted, I think, But Gar Samuelson is more of a feel type drummer that's more like kind of like Bill Ward, where, where he calls it orchestral drumming, right? He has that kind of vibe, right? And the new guy, I just don't think he's, I hate to say this, I'm sorry, but I just don't think he's I don't know, there's just something wrong with the snare sound, the way he hits it. I think he hits it so hard that you have to find, maybe that's it, right? He hits it so hard that you have to find a way to mix it that is different than anything that you've ever seen before. Or else what's going to happen is all you're going to hear is that snare. And that's what happened in the Sick, the Dying. And it's partially fixed here, but you can still just hear that snare, right? The snare shouldn't be the, like that. Now, the snare can be loud. This is just my opinion. So, snare can be loud, but it's got to be loud in a good way, right? It's got to be loud in a good way where, I think the snap that you hear from Dave Lombardo, right? That snap that you hear from Lombardo, that kind of snap, right? I don't know what's going on here with the snare, but that's the biggest thing that I can think of, is that he's a great drummer, but I don't know if he complements Megadeth the way that Gar Samuelson does, or maybe even Nick Manza does. I don't know. And I said I hate to make that comment, but sometimes it just doesn't fit. You can have everything, right? You can have everything. You can have the look. You can have the playability. You can have the the ability to play song after song after song, which is pretty insane, right? Richie Blackmore said the way he got Cozy Powell was that they took one song, which was, I think it was Starstruck, if I'm not mistaken, and Richie just played it like 33 times. over and over again, like 33 times. And he said every single drummer kind of fell apart after like the 9th time or the 10th time, right? After that, like they were just kind of, they couldn't play it. Cozy Powell was the only person who played it just like he played it the first time all the way to the end. And he knew that, the 33rd time or like 30 times, whatever it was. And he knew that that's the dude right there. So it's kind of like that. So that stamina, this drummer has that stamina. So he has all that stuff. Like I said, that's one of the things. He has all that stuff. But sometimes it just doesn't, I don't know. It just doesn't, maybe the feel is not there, completely. I don't know. It's just my opinion. Like I said, I think Gar Samuelson is the best drummer for this because he understood it. He understood the beat. He understood, when to come in, when not to play too much, how aggressive to play, how to complement the music, in a way that, it's captivating, right? So a lot of this stuff is kind of like that, to where you have to, and he's from a jazz, much like Bill Ward, actually. Like I said, Samuelson is from like a jazz, because him and Chris Poland used to be in a jazz band together, if I'm not mistaken, right? So he has that jazz influence, much like Bill Ward, and how Sabbath almost started as a jazz band, right? So kind of like a jazzy blues influence that they have. So that kind of thing, to where Nick Manza is good, but he's more like a machine. He's more like just like, okay, I'll put just a straight up, beat. Here, I think the only thing, sometimes when one aspect of art is so loud, by loud I mean, what I mean? Like, how people say, oh, you're wearing a loud tie, you know what I mean? Like something that sticks out, right? When you have something like that, right, you can't get over that. That's all you think about is, right? It's kind of like a dish with, too much spice. Like Indian, food, right? Indian food is great. It's spicy. But if you add too much of that spice, it'll just ruin the whole dish. So this is the same thing here, is that I can't think of anything else but the snare. Sorry to beat on this topic for so long, but I think maybe, what's wrong with me today? I think maybe they should just find, I mean, he's a great drummer. They should just find inventive ways to mix his snare in properly, right? So that it doesn't sort of stick out. Anyway, I don't know. But the mix definitely sounds better than the first album. Excuse me, the last album, The Sick, the Dying. Yeah, but definitely better sounds, sounds better than that. So, yeah, I'm hoping to, for the best. I want to hear it. I want to hear all the songs. I don't know how many songs are going to be on there, but we've heard 3 of them. All 3 of them are good. I think that one, where he, like the I Don't Care, that one, I think that's pretty good. He's kind of, that's like another, like I said, throwback kind of vibe, where that's like a, song where, I better be careful with my words here. Dave sort of complains about something, right? So that's like, Peace Sells, and that's like, a couple of those other songs that kind of fall like that, right? So I believe this song is kind of like that, in that vein, where, he's just throwing, giving you like, how he feels. Maybe not complain, but you know what I mean? How he feels. Kind of like, kind of like a punk-inspired attitude, if you will. Right? So I thought that was kind of like, it kind of reminds you of, like, like, like that kind of feel, right? Where he's just kind of like, kind of like the in-your-face attitude, typical sort of Dave Mustaine in-your-face attitude kind of song. I thought that was, that's what that reminded me of. Maybe it'll be a mixture of throwback, vibes. Maybe, heritage throwback vibes, maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of everything, Anyway, that's the thing here. I hope that it sounds good. Definitely going back to, like thrashy, because, there's a skank beat in there, right? So that's definitely cool. That, it's going back to like a, the roots of thrash. So I think that's really good. As opposed to something like, the other albums where they're kind of went into like hard rock instead of like, thrash, right? So this has the 3 songs so far seems to have a lot more, you know, thrashy roots to it. Like I said, there's always, as a musician, see, there's 2 things here. As a musician versus like as a fan, right? So as a musician, every single Megadeth album, there's always some cool picking patterns that, you know, that I can kind of look at and be like, oh wait, those are cool picking patterns. We talked about that before, right? We talked about these things before. So there's always cool picking patterns that, you know, as a musician, I can be like, oh wait, you know, he's palm muting this note, but, you know, he's letting that one ring. That's kind of cool. Like I said. Right. Remember how we talked about that riff and things like that? So there's always going to be that in every album, which is cool for, you know, a musician, you know, or like somebody who wants, you know, like a thrash, you know, person who's interested in that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that'll be there. But hopefully it's just put together in a way that it makes sense. Again, everything I've said today is just my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. Like I said, in the beginning of the video, I said that, you know, everything that I'm saying is with good intention. But isn't that the weirdest thing? That I'm driving around. What are the chances of that? Given that I make all these videos here, like, you know, we go over, like, you know, Megadeth riffs, and we say, what's cool about this riff? And then I just spot this car with a Megadeth license plate on it. Like I said, you got to be a pretty hardcore fan to do that. I'm sure there's a lot of hardcore fans around here. All right.